Hello, the topic is, do logging and prescribed burns prevent forest fires? We're going to be looking at a Forest Service video. So let's go ahead and look at it. We're going to look at 1 minute of this. I'm going to click over here and then...
Like nature's cleanup crew, these low-intensity fires routinely burned and thus removed shade-tolerant species, forest litter, dead and down trees, brush, ladder fuels, even the occasional full mature tree. Most tall mature conifer trees evolved to withstand low-intensity fire with resistant bark and their crowns high above the flames. Routine low-intensity wildfire created a resilient forest that was predominantly covered in big trees with little understory. There were also scattered openings and some places of dense vegetation. It was a mosaic landscape. We call this a fire-adapted ecosystem. In these forests, most species depended on low-intensity fire to regenerate, to recycle nutrients, and to maintain habitat. As modern populations in California...
Okay, so I wanted to show you that just to give you a feel for the video. It's a 4 minute, 45-second video, and I wanted to show you about a minute of it just to give you a feel for what it's like. I mean, I assume the guy is honest. He, lots of positive energy. He knows his material. On the one hand, he knows his material. On the other hand, I think he's in the business of spreading propaganda, knowingly or not. That's not for me to say, but I think he's spreading propaganda. And so what I've done is I took the video and I transcribed it, the whole thing, and I have a series of quote. Here's a quote from the video, and here's my response to it. So let's do that. I'm going to present again and share this screen and go to the slideshow. Let's see if that worked. And I want to do this view over here. So, California Forest News. Let's go to the next slide. For this slide presentation, I took a Forest Service video, transcribed it, and then wrote a response for almost every line of the video. So the video is there with the link if you wanted to see it and if you had this presentation, which maybe you don't. But let's go to the next slide. The quote says, now this is quoting verbatim from the slideshow. It said, or from the video, it says, in one of our previous episodes, we spoke about the type of high intensity wildfire that we're experiencing all across the state this entire fire season. How did our wildfires get to this type of intensity? The answer may actually lie with another type of wildfire, the low intensity fire. So I'm going to take issue with some of what he's saying. A prevailing theme with the Forest Service and with the timber industry is that they want us to think that the reason there's so much high intensity wildfire is that there is so little low intensity wildfire. They want us to think that we can use things like prescribed burning to burn up the fuel so that there's not as much fuel when a wildfire arrives. So they want you to think that excess fuel is the reason why we have such high intensity wildfires. The sources that I trust say that the reason there's, you have a big mega fire, you have a big catastrophic wildfire when there is when it's dry and windy. And that is the reason. You can't burn wet fuel. So it's not about how much fuel there is, it's about whether the fuel is wet or dry. Let's go on to the next quote. It says, hundreds of years ago, let me click on this view. Hundreds of years ago, low-intensity fire ignited by lightning or indigenous people routinely burned the mixed conifer forests of the Sierra Nevada. Research shows that the fire return interval how frequently fire burns a landscape was generally less than 20 years in a broad belt from the California hills all the way up through the mixed conifer forest. So what they're saying, what they're going to propose is that we need to use prescribed fire to get the fire back to a natural interval. So ironically, we're doing something man-made in order to do something natural. Now, there's a time for that, like prescribed grazing, I think is a real thing, but prescribed burning is like, we'll talk more about it. But another quote is, like nature's cleanup crew, these low-intensity fires routinely burned and thus removed shade-tolerant species, forest litter, dead and downed trees, brush, ladder fuels, and even the occasional full mature tree. Now, they have several things here that they're saying are all fire hazards, and I say none of them are fire hazards. They say shade tolerant species are fire hazards. Well, shade tolerant makes it sound fancy, and makes it sound like this guy knows what he's talking about in relation to the forest. But who says that shade tolerant species increase the risk of fire? It could be that shade tolerant species help decrease the risk of fire. It says forest litter is a fire hazard. Dead and down trees are fire hazards. But it's not the amount of fuel, it is how wet the fuel is. A down tree is a fire hazard. Those downed trees absorb a lot of water. They absorb, by the time they're a few years old, they absorb many times their weight in water. You cannot burn a wet log. That's why if you want to burn fire for fuel, first of all, you have to split the log, and then you have to make sure it does not get wet in the wintertime, because if it gets wet, it's not going to be able to burn. And it's the same thing with fuels, leaves, limbs, logs, snags. A snag is a standing dead tree. These things get increasingly porous over the course of time, and they are not the fire hazards that they're made out to be. In fact, they could play a role in preventing forest fires or making the forest fires burn at lower intensities. Quote, most tall, mature conifer trees evolved to withstand low-intensity fire. Let's go on. A routine low-intensity wildfire created a resilient forest that was predominantly covered in big trees and a little understory, with little understory. Now, so they're saying that back in the old days, there used to be little understory. Who says? Now, my man Chad Hansen, author of Smokescreen, did a study, and he went back into the Forest Service records and determined, based on just months and years of study of Forest Service original records, he determined that our forests used to be much denser than they are now. So this idea that back in the old days, the forests were thinner than they are now, does not match the findings of Chad Hansen, and I trust him more than the Forest Service, more than the timber industry. So let's go on. As modern populations in California continued to grow, our forests started to change. We expanded right into these fire-adapted ecosystems. I'm going to go on. Here in California, between the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, our partner, and all the great professional local resources, we've built the largest wildland firefighting organization the world has ever known. But perhaps we were too good. Low-intensity wildfire has been excluded from the Sierra Nevada for over a century. So what they're saying is that the solution is to bring in more low-intensity wildfire on the flawed notion that the problem is too much fuel. When you take away a low intensity fire from a fire adapted ecosystem, you're taking away nature's cleanup crew. So this is one of the most objectionable quotes to me in the whole thing. They're calling fire nature's cleanup crew, and there is a grain of truth in that, but fire is not nature's only cleanup crew. So let's talk about what they're saying there. Fire is not nature's only cleanup crew. An entire food chain is nature's cleanup crew. Cleanup crew, they're talking about kind of dead organic matter, dead animals, dead plants, dead fungi, dead bacteria. They're talking like the only way to clean that up is to burn it, but burning is not the only way to clean up something. The entire food chain, everything that dies has something that wants to eat that dead carcass, whether it's a plant, whether it's an animal, fungi, bacteria, all the rest. And to say that fire is nature's only cleanup crew, it sounds cool, but it's just plain misleading. Each year that passes, there's a buildup of more hazardous materials, shade-tolerant species, brush, forests that are dead and down trees. It's cumulative. That's why wildfires today are burning more intense. Wildfires today are burning more intense because of more dry weather, not because of more excess fuel. And again, they're listing shade-tolerant species, brush. Brush is a problem, but what are you going to do? Are you going to come in and burn it every 2 years? If you're going to restore a fire interval to once every 20 years or so, then that the brush, the litter, the leaves, the twigs, the pine needles are going to come back every year or two, and it's false to say that you can get rid of the fire hazard by burning it. For one thing, they're burning it in the spring, and it's just not going to burn very well. But you have succeeded in, burning insect larvae and burning baby birds and things like that are not naturally adapted to get away from a fire during the springtime because they can't fly yet. They are naturally adapted to getting away from a fire in the summertime. What did I say here? My response to this is they're saying dead and down trees are a fire hazard, but dead wood absorbs water and does not easily burn. This is especially true with larger trees. Using the word hazardous here is irresponsible and misleading because it suggests that decomposing organic matter is dangerous, and so we need to bring in heavy equipment to clean it up. That's another thing. They're saying that we need to get in there and practice something called active forest management, meaning we're going to bring in we're going to bring in fire, we're going to bring in, chainsaws are hardly a thing anymore in industrial forestry. It's more like heavy equipment. And you're bringing in the heavy equipment, you're compacting the soil, you're clearing, whatever's called thinning. Nobody's standing over them making sure they only take the thinner trees. In fact, if they get a permit to do thinning, they're probably removing some of the big trees as well. So let's go on. Let me see. The quote says, and wildfires are burning more intense than they were 40, 30, or even 10 years ago. There's more material to burn every year. I mean, look at all this. If someone is careless with a campfire right next door, that fire is going to burn all this with probably a little high intensity, which is going to catch all these ladder fuels on fire, and that fire is going to climb the ladder and right up into the crowns. Anyway, there's what he's saying is that it's just going to be a catastrophe if this catches fire. But the thing is that it's only a catastrophe if the forest is very dry. And if the forest is very dry and if there's a heavy wind, then the firefighting efforts are not going to suppress the fire anyway. To to 3% of fires are catastrophic. And if a fire is catastrophic, all the firefighting efforts are not going to do anything. So anyway, what you have is 90% of the fires can be controlled, but the smallest 90% of the fires are not the ones that do the most damage. Let's go on. So it says, and therein lies the relationship between high-intensity fire and low-intensity fire. The absence of routine, low-intensity wildfire creates high-intensity wildfire, the type of wildfire that's threatening our communities and natural resources all across the state. He's talking about the state of California. So we're supposed to believe that if you go in and do low-intensity fires, then how often are you going to do these low-intensity fires? If you're going to do low-intensity fires every couple of years, good luck with that. We don't have the resources to do that. And by the time you do low-intensity fires every couple of years, for one thing, it is much more frequent than the natural fire regime. And you're spending all of these resources on activities that don't actually prevent homes from burning. They don't protect people, homes, and communities. That's another issue, but the way you protect people, homes, and communities is something called home hardening, where you make the home more ignition proof, something called defensible space, which is where you tend to clear the area from around the home. And also people need evacuation planning and evacuation assistance, none of which is occurring if we're spending all of our resources on these futile efforts to fight fires in the wildlands. So anyway, this has been a review of one Forest Service video. The things I've been sharing with you, I've probably shared with you half of the major issues that you see repeated endlessly. That there's too much fuel, that the reason we have wildfires is because there's too much fuel. You hear endlessly that we need to do prescribed burns to restore natural fire regimes. They don't say anything about the effect of drought or dry weather in making the forest more flammable. They don't say anything about the role of a mature forest in making the forest less flammable, because you have less sun shining through and you have less wind blowing through. These are things that make a forest less flammable. So the organic matter, the biomass, the plant matter, if you let it grow, it actually has the effect of suppressing wildfires. So we're getting a lot of misinformation from the Forest Service, from the timber industry, and all you have to do, the great news is that all you have to do is learn a few basic concepts to be immune to the propaganda. It's called intellectual self-defense. It's what Noam Chomsky calls it. So the way to be able to detect a lie is to know the truth, and hopefully it's not true because I say it, but hopefully some of what I've shared is making sense. Thank you for joining me. Have a good day. Talk to you soon.